Hi, it's Rhonda Perry. I'm your youth specialist for the Coburg Public Library. Today's a pretty exciting day. I'm very happy to be presenting this virtual author visit. First one I've ever done. Usually I'm quite used to bringing in kids from the community when we have author presentations. So this is very new for me, but I'm super excited. Really excited because this author has been known to me as a Coburg Public Library user for a very long time, probably longer than either of us wants to admit. She's very familiar with libraries, very familiar with the collection here at the Coburg Public Library. And this past summer when I was camping, I had the opportunity to read her book. I get a lot of requests to read a lot of books, and sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's, you know, it's an okay story. This book is awesome. As soon as I finished reading it on my vacation, I immediately said, we need to do something. Let's do a virtual author visit because boys and girls and families need to know about this book. I just think it is such a great story. So I'm super excited to be welcoming this wonderful author, Prins, to our virtual author visit. And without further ado, Marie.
Thank you, Rhonda. That was an awesome introduction. As Rhonda says, I am the author of The Girl from the Attic. It's a book for children ages 8 to 12, but anyone can read it. Rhonda read it, and you can also read it to others, to perhaps someone who isn't reading novels yet, but would love to hear this story. Now, it's a time travel story. That means it takes place in two different times. And in this particular story, these two different times are 100 years apart. Now, Maddy Rose is the book's main character, and she and her family move into a very old house in the country. Now, Maddy's new home, as you can see, is in the shape of an octagon, which when it was built, was claimed by the builder to provide special healing powers or to keep the people in the house healthy. But that doesn't really matter to Maddy because she's basically not very happy moving there. She's left her best friend, Amy, in the city, and she hasn't met anyone new yet. And it's very hard to go live somewhere and not have any friends. And on top of that, she's not really getting along with her new stepfather, Dan, and her mother, Carla, is pregnant. She's going to have a baby pretty soon, and she's very tired, and she doesn't have much energy to do much of anything, actually. So what does happen, though, is that there is a mysterious black cat, whom I happen to have right here on my lap. And this cat has a white tip on its tail, and it shows up in the bushes. And Maddy sees it from time to time. And one day, she follows this black cat into the woodshed, which is attached to her house. You can see there's a ladder there. And Maddy climbs that ladder, and she follows this cat into that small door that you can see there, into an unknown attic room. Now, Maddy doesn't realize that right away that she stepped into the past, but she has. She hears people moving around in the kitchen below her feet, and she sees a hole in the floor covered by a round grate. Grate in the floor allows heat to go up into the attic. And you can bend over it and look down through it into the room below. And so that's what Maddy does. She bends down and she looks through it. So now I'm going to read you a part of the book where Maddy is going into this attic room, and I wanted to just see if I could get this little cat to cooperate with me and sit on my shoulder while I read, and hopefully don't fall off. Okay, I'm going to read to you that section where Maddy goes into this, through this small door into a long room. Maddy stoops through the small door into a long room with low walls and a sloping ceiling. It looked like one of the junk shops Papa George explored with her. There was a jumble of old furniture, a mattress on an iron bed frame, a washstand with a cracked oval mirror, long rolled up rug. She hadn't seen this room when she first explored the octagon after their move. Was it part of the woodshed? If so, why hadn't Dan hauled all this junk to the dump? Something landed with a thud in the shadows. A cat. Where was she? Maddy stepped forward to look under the bed and stumbled. When she regained her balance, she realized that she had almost fallen down a flight of stairs. Heart thumping, she peered down those steep steps that led to a narrow green door and two yellow eyes that blinked and vanished. Maddy shrank away from the stairs. Was the cat down there? Or something else? Shivers like mice feet ran up her spine. And then she felt her back grow warmer. Heat radiated from a fat black pipe rising through the floor in the middle of the room to the ceiling. A few feet away, a faint pattern of light shimmered out of an iron grate in the floor. Through it came a low murmur of voices that grew louder and more distinct, as if an invisible hand had adjusted a radio to its right spot. The bread's out of the oven. I'll butter the carrots now. That pot is heavy. Let me drain and mash the potatoes. Are the sausages done yet? In a room below, muffled footsteps crossed the floor. A lid clanked on a pot. The steely rasp of a knife being sharpened rose through the grate. More footsteps. A moment later, Maddy heard a blade scratching the wooden surface with repetitive strokes. So she crept to the grate and knelt over it. At first, through its geometric pattern, she saw only a long table covered in a white cloth. On top sat 5 plates and cups, and in the middle, slices of bread cooled on a cutting board. A yeasty aroma drifted up to Maddy's nose. Then, a small, hunched woman dressed in black from head to toe shuffled to the table and placed a bowl with steaming carrots in its middle. Maddy twisted her head and leaned closer to the grate. A large black cook stove came into view. Sausages and onions sizzled in a frying pan at its back. Next to it, steam rose lazily out of an iron kettle. In front of the stove stood a tall young woman with her hair pinned on top of her head. She grasped the handle of a large pot and vigorously mashed potatoes in it. Maddy inched her knees closer and peered into the corner of the old kitchen. There sat a black rocking chair with bright purple and white asters painted on its back. Behind it stretched a red brick wall. Maddy sucked in her breath. That's the wall of my kitchen. She clapped her hand over her mouth. The bent woman tilted her head sideways and glanced at the ceiling. Maddy leaned away from the grate, afraid she had been seen by the strangers below her. What were they doing in her kitchen? And why did it look so different? When she peered again through the opening, she saw the old woman wave her hand towards the back door, where a rusty squeaking of metal against metal could be heard outside. I hear them washing up at the pump, Helen. Oh, sit yourself down now, Ella, and I'll finish the serving. The young woman adjusted a white apron over her long gray and white striped shirt. Why are they wearing those clothes in the summer? They look awfully hot. As Aunt Ella plumped a pillow in a chair by the table, boots stomped across the floor. Maddy's nose touched the grate as she bent closer to see the new arrivals. A long-legged boy and a heavy-set man with dark cropped hair entered the kitchen. And they settled down at the table below her. "Where's Eva?" asked Aunt Ella, a note of concern in her voice. "In the hen house," the boy said. "One of the new chicks is looking sickly. He's fixing a box for it." "Oh, Claire, shouldn't you be giving her a hand?" Claire rose in his chair, but before he could stand, a tall, thin girl with brown curls framing a flushed face burst through the door. She held a wooden box. Straw poked over its edges. From inside came a weak beep, beep, beep. "This chick needs a warm place." Eva pushed the box next to the cook stove's metal legs. She straightened and wiped her hands on her skirt. A dark shape swung from under the table and disappeared behind the stove. "The cat'll get it," said Aunt Ella. With a serene smile, Eva shook her head and sat down next to Claire. "Shadows, just curious." And on cue, the black cat with the white tip on its tail disappeared, sniffed the box and retreated back under Aunt Ella's chair. Eva laughed and picked up the fork. "To be safe, Claire says he'll put a lid on the box, and he'll feed the chick for me and change its water after I leave. He names it Speckles, after the marks on its feathers." "Best not get a liking for it," said the old man. "You won't be wanting to eat a chicken that you've named." "Oh, Uncle Ray, we're not going to eat it. It's a laying hen." Claire shifted in his chair. "That little peeper may be a rooster, Eva." Eva took a bite of carrots and chewed it slowly. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but still, it deserves to live." Aunt Ella regarded Eva with sad eyes, but said nothing. Claire stared at his plate. For a few minutes, no one spoke, and then Eva covered her mouth and coughed into her hand a short, tight cough. She put down her fork. "I'm not hungry," she said. "I think I'll rest till it's time for the train." Claire jumped up and pulled the rocking chair away from the wall. When Eva sat down, she began to cough again. Reaching into her skirt pocket, she pulled out a large handkerchief and buried her face in it. A long spasm racked her body. And when it stopped, a large red stain spread across the white cloth she held in her hand. So now, in this part of the story that I've just read, you can see that Maddy has seen the people who lived in her house 100 years before she moved in with her family. And there's the boy Clare, which is short for Clarence, and his sister Eva. And living there also are two aunts and Uncle Ray. And as you heard, the girl is very ill. And Maddy soon learns that Eva suffers from tuberculosis, which is a very bad disease that mainly affects someone's lungs and makes it hard for them to breathe. And so they cough and cough and cough. Now, in Claire and Eva's time, there was no cure for tuberculosis. Some people did recover, but not many. They became very weak, and eventually they died. So in this story, Maddy and the boy Clare want to find a cure for Eva. And a big part of their plans take place in Uncle Ray's small factory across the road. Now, no children are allowed in this building. It's a dangerous place. And Uncle Ray makes soap there. old-fashioned soap. He melts beef fat, which comes from cows, and it's called tallow, and he mixes it with soda ash, a chemical that can burn skin and even blind someone if it gets in their eyes. But Maddy's very curious, and she wants to see the inside of this factory. So one day Claire takes her there. And that's the next part that I'm going to read in the book, where Maddy first enters this factory. With a heave, Claire slid open the mill's wooden door. Maddy entered behind him into the cavernous space, where only a dim light seeped through dirty windows high above their heads. After the brightness of the sun, Maddy's eyes slowly widened at the cluttered scene before her, and then her nose twitched. Ew, what's that smell? Something was rotting. Something far worse than a garbage pail left under the sink too long. That's the beef fat boiling on the stove behind you. We use it to make the soap. Uncle Ray's collecting more from the butcher now. Maddy stared at the enormous wood stove. From a large black pot, steam rose lazily into the air, spreading the rancid odor throughout the building. You make soap with that foul stuff? Claire picked up a log from a pile on the floor. He opened the stove door and pitched it inside. Well, you probably buy sunlight soap, all wrapped in fancy papers, he said with a shake of his head. City ladies love it. Even country women fancy it to our soap. Maddy had never heard of sunlight soap. She shrugged and turned towards the large, dark room. Its disorder was unlike anything she had ever seen. Small wooden barrels and rusty cans lay scattered here and there in the middle of the huge space. In the middle of the huge space stood an enormous round tub. In the ceiling, a metal rod extended from the back wall and hung directly over the tub, dropping a paddle the size of a large oar into the center. A three-legged iron bat with a spigot at its bottom leaned towards the tub. Show a picture of the inside of the factory. Maddy eyed it uneasily. That looks like a witch's cauldron. Don't touch it. There's lye in it. Maddy shrank back and bumped into Claire. He grasped her hand to steady her. I told you, this place ain't for girls. It's dangerous. Exasperation prickled Maddy. She yanked her arm back. What's so dangerous about making soap? Well, lye can burn you real good. Uncle Ray wears leather gloves and goggles when he's using it. Maddy shifted in her chair. Don't worry so much. I'm not stupid. I won't touch it. She tilted her head and challenged. So tell me, what do you do with that lye stuff? Claire's lips tightened for a moment, but then her shoulders began to relax. Making soap's complicated, he said with resignation. See those cans of soda ash on the floor? Well, you mix water with that stuff in this here vat, the one you call the witch's cauldron, and you let it sit a while till it turns into lye. Like I said, it's nasty stuff. Burns your skin, blinds you if you get a drop in your eye. And it's got nasty fumes, too. Real bad for your nose. Huh, I'm surprised your uncle lets you in here, she smirked, thinking his dramatic description of the process made the mill seem like a death trap for anyone who walked through its door. And so that's where I'm going to end. And right after this part, of course, Claire describes to Maddy a little bit more about how soap is made and how eventually it's turned into bars of soap. And these bars of soap are, of course, very safe for people to use. It's only the process of making soap that is dangerous in the factory, not the soap itself once it's made. Later on in the story, Claire and Maddy spend more time in this factory. And when they're there, they're working on a money-making plan that they've hatched, trying to raise money and buy a cure for Eva. And of course, things don't work out. They never work out quite the way anyone envisions, and certainly not the way Maddy envisions. And there are many twists and turns in the story. And there's also a second story in this book, one that's happening at the same time, which is what happens in Maddy's real life when she goes back to her family. Now, Maddy's really involved in Claire's life and what's happening with Eva and trying to help her get better. And she neglects her own family. There are some real needs in her family, things that she really needs to pay attention to, and she ignores them. And so, of course, things get worse there. And she has to change her behavior and pay more attention to her own family so that her own problems are solved. But you're going to have to read the book in order to find out that part of the story, as well as what happens in Claire and Eva's time. And if you want to read this story, which I'm hoping you will, it's going to be available in 2 weeks' time, around October the 7th. So Rhonda, I hear you have some good questions that you want to ask me about this.
Yes, so normally when we welcome authors such as yourself to the Cobourg Public Library, we invite school children or members of the public to ask questions of our authors. And of course, during this time of COVID, things like that can't happen quite the same way. So I put together some questions. Obviously, they're not coming from the children themselves, but you know, they might find the questions that I'm asking interesting. And maybe there's some of the questions they might have thought of themselves. So one of the things that interests me is because we've had writing contests here at the library for many years, and thinking about the writing process. So when you have a story and it's all, you know, finished and you're ready to share it with a publisher, that's a pretty big deal. And one of the things that you and I discussed, Marie, was so then there's somebody who works for a publisher called an editor. Mm-hmm. And when that editor, for lack of better terminology, picks apart your story, how does that make you feel? I know for myself only, somebody critiquing what I've done, it becomes very personal, and I might not handle it very well. So if you wish to be a published author, how do you deal with that?
That's a great question, Rhonda. Thank you for asking that one. I think I'm going to answer it in two parts. When you start to write a story, and you really want to work on it hard, and you're hoping at some point that it's going to be published, and it's really important that you find some friends who can be your reading partners. I was part of what is called a critique group, and we got together every month and we read each other's work, and we gave very good constructive feedback to each other on how our books or our writing could be better. And yes, that sometimes is hard to hear because you've worked really hard and you think it's great, and then someone says this or someone says that and your heart kind of drops. But you know in the back of your head two things: that this advice is being given to you to help you, and the other thing is that if you don't agree with it, you don't have to take it. So you weigh all of the advice that's given to you. And I have found over the years that I get lots of advice on a piece of writing, and some of it is conflicting with the other people's advice. And so I just keep my mouth shut, I listen, I think about it, and I do what I think needs to be done to make my story better. And that also happened, of course, when my book was accepted by Commandeer Press. And I got an email saying, this is Emily, she was my editor, and she was going to help me basically not rewrite my book, but certainly work on sections that needed work. And I was a little taken back. I thought, hey, I think my book is pretty good. But when Emily sent me all the suggestions, and she sent me a lot of suggestions, and more than once. I saw that most of them were ones that I agreed with. I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I made the changes, and I had to make some big changes. I had to take out some parts and write new parts. But in the end, I think the book was a much better book for all that work.
Well, kudos to you, Marie, to Emily, and all your friends and family that helped you to make it a better book, because it's wonderful.
Thank you.
The next question that I have for you is related to the writing process. Where do your ideas come from? How do you discipline yourself to keep the story going? And as a second part to that, are there any similarities in your story to the area that you live in? Anything that you drew from when creating The Girl from the Attic?
Okay, again, those are great questions. Those are actually two questions. So I'll answer the first one about where do I get my ideas. Ideas come, I swear, from the sky sometimes. They just kind of pop into your head. You know, you might be in bed at night, or you might be taking a walk, or who knows, you know, all of a sudden some idea comes, and it's always a good idea to have a book handy somewhere that you can jot down your ideas, because you might think you're going to remember them, but they can vanish. So it's always a good idea just to jot down your ideas when they come to you in a little book that you keep close by. You may carry it around with you, or you may have it next to your bed, or you may keep it in a room in your house. So that's always a good thing for writers to do. And you can see, well, I don't know if you can see, but I've got many pages here filled with many ideas for many stories. And then, but that's a tiny book. I mean, you can have bigger books, and they don't have to be fancy. This one I got when I bought cat food, but I think it's a great book to jot down ideas. But that was the first part of the question. Where do story ideas come from, and what do you do with them? You jot them down. And then when you have the time, you choose one and you start to work on them. And as far as this particular book came, the story came, there's a backstory with it. When my children were younger, I read to them a story called The Root Cellar by a Canadian author named Janet Lunn. And, now this was a while ago, but this book is still in print. It's a great book. And it is also a time travel story. And it takes place here in Ontario in Prince Edward County. And I was fascinated by the idea that someone could go through a portal and go back in time and visit the people perhaps who lived in their house or in a neighboring house or close by. And that is what the girl Rose in this story did. And so I was very fascinated by that, and I loved reading this story to my kids. And I've read it a couple times since, just to myself, because it inspired the story I wrote. And that story came about as the last assignment that was given to me in a children's writing course, to write the first page of a fantasy story. And as I was driving home that night, the rough idea for The Girl from the Attic came into my head. And I chose an octagonal house because I happen to live in one, and I knew its ins and outs very well. But the character Maddy in the present is very, very fictional, so it's entirely made up. There are a few characters in the past that are based on people who actually lived in the octagon, but very, very loosely, because I really don't know much about them. I just know that they lived here at one time.
Well, for our viewers, I'm not sure if they're aware of all the different genres or themes that your book encompasses. I mean, yes, it's time travel, but it's also sort of like dealing with the problems in families. So, you know, there's something going on in Maddy's real world, the today world, that she's trying to deal with, but it's also history. And the part that I like is, you know, back in the time, in the portal, they're dealing with tuberculosis. And today we're dealing with COVID. And so there's so many aspects of your story that I just think make it just such a powerful book, really great story. But you mentioned The Root Cellar. Obviously, that's one of the books that you read to your children. But for yourself, Marie, did you have a favorite childhood book or books or a series that are still near and dear to your heart?
Well, because I knew you might ask me that question, Rhonda, I went on my bookshelf and I took down the
Wow.
book itself, the actual book that I read.
Yay, I love it.
It was, I can't remember, I think maybe 11 or 12. And I read this book many times because I really liked it. It's Jane Eyre, and it's a very popular book still. Many movies have been made out of the Jane Eyre story. I don't know if you can see the cover itself. It shows all of these girls in a boarding school, not very happy. And Jane Eyre was not happy in her boarding school. But the book itself has these lovely, lovely illustrations in them. Here's one. And you can see they're black and white. And I wanted illustrations in my book too, not because they're in Jane Eyre, but because I like the idea of illustrations in books for older kids. It helps whoever reads the book to visualize the setting and the people better. So that was my favorite story. I read that a lot. I read many other books too, but I do remember reading that many times.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us. In your book, The Girl from the Attic, what was the hardest scene for you to write?
When Maddy goes into the past, she's full of great ideas of how to help Clare, and particularly how to help his sister Eva get better. And she has a lot of energy for her plans there. But she's not always very sensitive about how she's handling her ideas. And I had to write a scene. This was one of those scenes where my editor said, I think you need to make this particular scene, put this particular scene in over here and expand it a bit. And so I had to really think about what Maddy was doing with all of her great ideas and how perhaps insensitive she was to Clare and his life. And I had to really get into the minds and the hearts of both of these characters to work out this scene, because Maddy had to apologize and Clare had to accept the apology. But it had to be done in a way that was very believable to both of them in their circumstances. So that I think was the hardest scene for me to write.
Sometimes apologizing is very difficult, and sometimes accepting apology can be very hard. So I can see that would be challenging.
Yeah.
From start to finish, Marie, how long would you say it took you to end up with a published book?
A long time. From the day of that assignment until I actually was given a contract, not even until it was published, was about 10 years. Now, that is an awful long time because I had never written a book before. And I had to learn how to do that. And that I had many revisions. I had many storylines that I dropped. And I went down what they call rabbit holes, and how to come back out of these rabbit holes and get back into my story. Um, so I have ideas that I'm sketching out right now for a second book, and I don't think that's going to take me 10 years. 1 or 2 years, yes, but now I have a much better idea of how to write a book, how to go, what's important.
So that leads me to another question. Now that you have a better idea, and I'm very excited to know, is this next book going to be a sequel, or is it a standalone type of story?
So it's going to involve Maddy. I already know the portal that Maddy goes through. It's not
Yay! Oh, I'm super excited. I think that's awesome.
So I hope to get the time to do it.
Well, yes. So hopefully there are boys and girls out there and parents and maybe already some other authors in our community watching. And so I want to ask you the question, if they're out there and they do have a passion for writing, but maybe they've never really thought about how to put pen to paper per se, or how to get onto the computer and actually put their stories together. Do you have advice on how to get started on writing?
Well, again, it starts with ideas. You get an idea, you think, boy, this will make a good story. I like this story. And you get yourself a notebook like I was showing you. It doesn't have to be very big. Can just even be lined paper if that's all you have around at the moment. But you start jotting your ideas down. And then you have to make a decision. Are you someone that likes to write with a pen and paper or pencil and paper, or do you prefer to use a computer? I prefer to use a computer. I jot my ideas down here, but when I actually start to write, I prefer the computer, but every person's different. So you get your ideas down, you jot your ideas down, and then you start. And don't worry about being perfect. Just get whatever's in your head down on paper or into that computer. You can always come back. You'll have to come back. It's inevitable, and change things. And you don't even have to start at the beginning of your story. If you've got an idea that takes place somewhere in the middle, or even if it's the ending, you can write that and then come back and build your story on that. Now, some people, some writers, they do a whole outline of exactly where they want the story to go, and then they follow that outline and they plot it out. And then there are other authors who are called pantsers because they write by the seat of their pants, and they just sit down and write and see where the story takes them. But I think most writers are sort of in between there. I certainly am in between. The other thing that I think is important to do is when you've got your story written, at least its first draft, then find a reading partner, someone you trust, someone who also likes to read books. It doesn't necessarily have to be a writer, but if that other person does like to write, all the better. And then exchange stories and ask that person to tell you what's good about the story, what they like, and then also to ask them, what do you think I need to change? What doesn't make sense? What has to be written more clearly? Those kinds of questions. It could be an adult, or it could be someone your own age.
So I'm curious, and maybe when the kids in our community pick up your book, which I hope they will, why did you write the ending the way that you did?
Yeah. I had a feeling you were going to ask me that question. I don't want to give the ending away.
No.
Why did I write the ending the way I did? To be perfectly honest, I cannot remember if I had that ending in mind from the very beginning, but I know it was there pretty close to the beginning because I wanted what happens to Maddy in the past to make a difference for her life in the present. I wanted the past to literally meet the present, so that whatever happened to Maddy in the past wasn't just left there. it got carried forward into her present life and made a good, positive difference in her present life. And so that is really all I'm going to tell you about it. But most people who read my book really like the ending. It comes as a surprise.
I loved it. So, Marie, the Coburg Public Library is going to have a copy, which you have very generously donated. And we're going to make it available the beginning of October here at the library. But I know there are other families and boys and girls out there that are going to want to rush out and buy your book. So can you tell our viewers exactly where they can get their own personal copy if they wish to have it of The Girl from the Attic?
Okay. Well, if you live here in Northumberland County, where Coburg is, then you can go to Let's Talk Books in Coburg, and also Sparks is going to carry it. So there's two places there. If you live around the Port Hope area, Kirby House Books will be carrying it. And if you live further east, in Brighton, Lighthouse Books will be carrying it. And all three libraries in Brighton and in Colborne and Coburg, I have to call up Port Hope yet, but I'm sure they'll carry it. They're going to also have copies to borrow. Now, if you don't live in our area, and I know some of our viewers do not, then I strongly encourage you to go to your local independent bookstore and ask them to order the book for you, and then to order an extra copy or two to put on the shelf for other patrons.
And children always have questions, and children love to write to authors. Could we attach your contact information at the bottom of this virtual author visit for families and children to contact you and maybe give you some feedback on your book?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, you've got that contact information, Rhonda. Do you want me to repeat it?
Sure. For our viewers, that would be great.
Okay. So you can email me, readingroom@eagle.ca, or you can go on my website, which is www.marieprins.ca.
That's so awesome. Just awesome.
Yeah, there's contact information on my website, and lots more information about the book.
I always tell families when they come in and I do a book recommendation of a local author, you know, this person lives in the area or whatever, but I always truly give my honest opinion, and that is, I'm not recommending this book because they're local. I'm recommending it because it's good. And I say that to all the boys and girls out there right now. I don't recommend this just because Marie Prins is a local author. I recommend it because it's fantastic and it's worth and worthy and deserving of reading. A fantastic book, The Girl from the Attic, and everybody should check it out. Marie, I want to thank you. That was a pun. Did everybody get that? Coburg Public Library, you should check it out. Yes, please check it out. Marie, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon, not only to promote your book, to talk about the writing process. And I think it's been a really great experience, something new for both you and I, so kudos to us. And thanks for bringing the props and the artwork, and we're super excited and very proud of your success, and we wish you all the best with your writing. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you, Rhonda. This has been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed it. So hopefully everyone else will be able to read a little bit more about where shadow leads Maddy, because shadow is a very important part of the book.
Bye, everybody.